Secrets of Plant Biology, Episode 6, The Flowering Signal. There is a moment in the life of a plant when everything changes direction. Growth that was once focused on expansion begins to shift. New priorities emerge. Energy stops being distributed evenly across structure and instead becomes concentrated towards a single purpose. The plant begins preparing for reproduction. This transition is not random, and it is not gradual in the way surface observations might suggest. It is triggered by a precise set of environmental signals that the plant has been measuring all along. Among the most important of these signals is light. Specifically, the relationship between light and darkness over time. Plants do not simply respond to how bright their environment is. They respond to how long that environment remains dark without interruption. This measurement of night length becomes a form of biological timing, allowing the plant to distinguish between seasons, even without temperature cues or visible changes in surroundings. Inside the plant, this timing system is regulated through sensitive photoreceptors that track changes in light exposure with remarkable precision. During daylight hours, specific proteins are activated by light. During darkness, those proteins shift into different states. Over time, the plant is able to compare these cycles, building an internal record of day length that informs future development. When nights reach a certain consistent length, a signal begins to form internally. It is not a single switch, but a gradual hormonal shift that builds across multiple cycles. Growth hormones that once supported vertical and lateral expansion begin to decrease in influence. At the same time, reproductive signaling pathways become more active. This is the flowering transition. At this stage, the plant is no longer primarily investing in structure for expansion. Instead, it begins reallocating resources towards reproduction. New growth patterns emerge, nodes begin to form in tighter, more structured arrangements. Energy is redirected away from general vegetative development and towards specialized reproductive sites. In cannabis, this shift is especially significant because the plant is highly responsive to photoperiod changes. Even subtle variations in light exposure can influence when and how this transition occurs. The plant is essentially reading its environment to determine whether conditions are appropriate for reproduction. This is not decision-making in the conscious sense. It is a biochemical interpretation, a continuous evaluation of environmental consistency over time. Once flowering begins, internal chemistry changes dramatically. The plant enters a phase where energy is no longer distributed broadly across growth, but concentrated into developing reproductive structures. These structures require significant metabolic investment, and the plant must reorganize its entire internal resource allocation to support them. Leaves that once played a central role in growth may begin to shift their functions. Some become more specialized in energy production, while others can contribute indirectly to supporting developing reproductive sites. The architecture of the plant subtly reorganizes to optimize energy flow towards the area that matters most for reproduction. At the same time, hormonal balances shift again. Compounds that regulate stretching, branching, and structural expansion are reduced, while others associated with maturation and reproductive development increase. This internal recalibration affects not only shape, but chemistry as well. In cannabis, This stage is also when resin production becomes more pronounced. The plant begins producing increased levels of protective compounds that accumulate on specialized structures. These compounds are not produced arbitrarily. They are part of the plant's protective strategy during reproduction, helping shield sensitive tissues from environmental stress, pests, and radiation during a vulnerable phase of development. What appears externally as resin is internally part of a defensive and regulatory system. The flowering signal is not only about light, it is also influenced by the plant's overall internal condition. A plant that is under severe stress, nutrient imbalance, or environmental instability may delay or disrupt this transition. A plant that has developed under stable conditions is often able to transition more predictably and maintain reproductive development more efficiently. This reveals something important about plant biology. Timing is not just external, it is internal alignment. The plant does not simply react to seasonal change, it interprets whether conditions are stable enough to support reproduction. Once flowering is fully underway, energy distribution becomes highly focused. Growth slows in many structural areas as resources are redirected towards reproductive development. Internodes may shorten, structural expansion becomes more refined, and the plant begins prioritizing efficiency over expansion. This is where architecture and reproduction intersect. The structure of the plant directly influences how effectively light, air, and energy reach developing sites. Poor structure can limit reproductive efficiency. Balanced structure allows deeper penetration of light and better distribution of resources. Everything, once again, is connected. Even at the root level, changes occur during this transition. Root activity may stabilize or shift in pattern, aligning with the new demands of the above-ground system. Nutrient uptake becomes more specific, reflecting the changing needs of reproductive development rather than general growth. What is most important to understand is that flowering is not an isolated phase. It is the result of everything that came before it. Light exposure, structural development, root health, environmental stability, and stress history all contribute to how this transition unfolds. The flowering signal is not a single moment. It is the culmination of accumulated information over time. And once it begins, the plant is no longer building for expansion alone. It is building for continuation. In that sense, flowering is not just a biological stage. It is a shift in purpose, a reorganization of life from growth towards expression, from structure towards reproduction, from expansion towards legacy. And it all begins with the plant listening carefully enough to know when the world around it is ready for the next step.